On this edition of Connect to the Capitol Extra, we're going to talk through two major issues that hit both the courtroom and the community in South Carolina. First, on the national front. On Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Medina versus Planned Parenthood, with South Carolina at the center of that case. While so many have made this an issue about abortion, what's really at stake is whether states like ours have the authority to determine which providers participate in Medicaid and whether individuals can challenge those decisions in federal court. Then on the state front, we will talk about a serious public safety concern, protecting our children online. South Carolina Attorney General Ellen Weaver recently issued a public warning about violent online groups that are targeting minors. A bill at the State House, S-74, could give the Attorney General's office new tools to catch online child predators faster. Here to discuss these two major items is South Carolina Attorney General Weaver. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wonderful to have you in studio. Mr. Attorney General, for folks who did not tune into the live argument on Wednesday, just what is this case, Medina versus Planned Parenthood, about? What is going on here, and how is South Carolina involved?
Well, as you know, Medicaid comes from the federal government to the states, and the states get to determine how they want to spend those Medicaid dollars as they flow them through medical service providers. In 2018, Governor McMaster did an executive order that basically said no medical service providers like Planned Parenthood, anyone who provides an abortion services, is not entitled to Medicaid. So only those service providers who don't provide abortion can receive those Medicaid services. As you know, under the Hyde Amendment at the federal level, you can't use taxpayer funds to fund abortions. But what we've learned is that a lot of these organizations like Planned Parenthood, they take the Medicaid dollars, let's say they receive $1 million in Medicaid dollars to perform 10 medical services that have nothing to do with abortion. That frees up other money for them to do abortion. So it's like pouring water into a bucket of water. Once that money's commingled, then it's an indirect way to fund abortions. And this is a position that our state, through its elected leadership and its legislature, have deemed that this is not what we want to do. Again, we're not saying that families who need Medicaid as a way to fund for medical services and go to certain service providers can't go there. You can go to any service provider you want. If you happen to choose Planned Parenthood to go for a cancer screening, we're not saying you can't get the cancer screening. There are 1,000 other ways you can get that cancer screening paid for. You just can't do it at Planned Parenthood because they also provide abortion as a service. So that's what the case is basically about. Can states determine whether those can they prohibit the Medicaid dollars from going to those groups like Planned Parenthood who provide abortion? In South Carolina, we have taken the position that we do not want taxpayer-funded abortions, and this is a backdoor to that, and we're trying to prevent it.
Sure. You know, your water analogy is a fantastic way to describe the fungibility of money. I really appreciate that. And just looking at the legal crux here, it really is about whether Medicaid patients can bring private lawsuits to challenge a state's decision on who is a qualified provider for Medicaid services. So can you just walk us through why that matters, and not just for this case, but really for state authority going forward?
Well, the other side of the argument is going to argue that these Medicaid recipients have a right to bring this action because their rights are being violated, and that they have a right to go to the service provider of their choice. South Carolina is saying you don't have the right to go, and I'm paraphrasing, you have a right to get the money to go to get the services you want, but not necessarily from that specific provider, because that provider might be providing abortion among its menu of services it provides. And if we're giving them Medicaid dollars for the non-abortive patient services, that is freeing up other dollars to go to abortion services. So it is an indirect way to fund abortion with taxpayer dollars, and South Carolina doesn't want that to happen here. Again, we're not trying to prevent people from getting these services. We just don't want a backdoor in to the abortive patient or abortion services. So that's what we're arguing.
Sure. Now, from the oral arguments, which took place this past Wednesday, did you hear, and what you listened to, did you hear anything from the justices that might signal to how they might rule, from the tone, the back and forth, anything along those lines?
So if I could predict how the Supreme Court is going to rule in any given case, especially this one, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket. I don't think I can legally buy a lottery ticket, but if I could, I would, predicting the future like that. But what I have observed is you're going to have presumably 3 liberal members of the court who will rule against South Carolina. You will have 3 members of the court who people believe and presume will rule for South Carolina, and there are 3 justices in the middle. The 3 in the middle are conservative justices appointed by Republican presidents, but based on the way they question, 1 or 2 of them could go either way. So this could be a split court either way. And so which way this case goes, who knows? We are guardedly optimistic, but the legal scholars are going to say that this is a close call based on how the justices questioned.
Sure. We'll be watching closely for a ruling on this in the couple months to come from the Supreme Court. But I'd like to shift now to something closer to home and frankly just as urgent. Your office put out a public alert this past week alerting parents, all individuals, all South Carolinians about these online gore-seeking groups. These groups that are in fact targeting minors. So for parents who might not be familiar, who don't know about some of the horrors that are available online, what is this group and how are they targeting our children?
Well, first I want to thank the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI is the one that alerted us to this. That's going on around the country and is now, the 764 movement has now made its way to South Carolina. I also want to thank Superintendent Ellen Weaver of the State Department of Education and her team because they have partnered with us on raising awareness in the schools around South Carolina. But what the 764 movement basically is, it's an online movement. It derives its name from the area code in Texas where it began. It has its roots in neo-Nazi and satanic organizations, so it's a very dark organization. It's not organized, so I mean it's not like there's a hierarchy of leadership. But it's usually, you find, not always, but usually teenagers exploiting other teenagers. And the ages ranges from 10 to 16 or 17 years old. So you have kids that are basically recruiting or grooming young kids, teenagers, to come into this organization. And over a period of time, they get them to start producing and promoting graphic content, gory content. They could get them to cut themselves, self-mutilation, get them engaged in animal abuse or killing an animal. We've seen that. Bestiality. Really dark stuff. In some cases, they try to talk these kids into killing themselves and committing suicide, and that has occurred in other states. And then they use these videos as blackmail to extort these kids to do more graphic and gory content and produce it, or go recruit other teens to come in and do it, and that's how they grow their content. And so we have been trying to raise awareness with parents because it is now occurring here in South Carolina, and we want to raise awareness so that parents know what to be on the lookout for and what they can do to protect their teen or their child from being exploited like this.
Just thank you for everything that you're doing for South Carolina children. You know, you also, relatedly, in a way, have backed Senate Bill 74. What can you tell us about that and how that could help you catch some of these other child predators? So
as you know, I have the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force under my office, and we have over nearly 130 agencies in the state of South Carolina working with the Attorney General's office to go out there and protect children from predators and pedophiles online who are preying on our children and trying to groom them and do all sorts of unspeakable things to them, to include generating child sex abuse material, also known as child porn, and getting videos and photos and things like that. What this bill does is it cuts the red tape that currently exists at the state level that allows us to better, more efficiently, and quickly go after these horrible people. And basically what it does is currently, if I want to go and get an IP, the name and address associated with an IP, if we see that there's a report that someone is engaging in child porn, we can see their IP address, but we don't know their name or their physical address. Currently, I have to go to the federal government to get an administrative subpoena so that I can go to the internet service provider and find out that John Doe is at 123 Elm Street, and then we can get a warrant to go get his computer or tablet. This would allow us to cut out the feds and do it at the state level, and which makes it a lot faster and a lot more clean and efficient.
That sounds like such an incredibly important bill. I certainly hope the tech companies are being supportive with everything that you're doing.
Yes, and it already has passed the state Senate. It is now in the state House, and so if you want to call your House member and say support S74, this will give the Attorney General's office the power and the authority they need to better protect our children. That would be a big help to us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Attorney General Alan Wilson, thank you again for joining and for giving us a behind-the-scenes look at how South Carolina is helping to shape this case and these issues at the national level, as well as protecting children here at home. Thank you for joining us all for Connect to the Capitol Extra, and be sure to start following us on Facebook as we keep you connected to the Capitol.